sufficient strength of mind to go up to my parents and do pranam to them. Members of the family or even servants must have wondered what had made the rebellious boy suddenly so submissive. Little did they know, perhaps, that behind the phenomenon was the hand of a sadhu. After some weeks, perhaps months, I began to question myself as to what I had gained from the above practice, and not being satisfied with the reply, I gave it up. I went back to the teachings of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. No realization without renunciation. I told myself again. It would be a mistake to conclude that my conception of a religious life was restricted to the practice of individualistic yoga. Though for some time I went too crazy over yogic exercise, it is slowly dawned on me that for spiritual development, social service was necessary. The idea came probably from Vivekananda, for as I have indicated above, he had preached the ideal of the service of humanity, which included the service of one's country. But he had further enjoined on everyone to serve the poor, for according to him, God often comes to us in the form of the poor, and serve the poor too is to worship the God. I remember that I became very liberal with beggars, fakirs, and sadhus, and whenever any of them appeared before our house, I helped them with whatever came within my reach. I derived a peculiar satisfaction from the act of giving. Before I was 16, I had my first experience of what may be glorified with the appellation of a village reconstruction work. We went to a village in the outskirts of the town with the object of attempting some service. We entered the village primary school and did some teaching by the teachers and villagers in general. We were warmly welcomed and we felt greatly encouraged. We then proceeded to another village but met with sad experience there. We entered the village. The villagers who had seen us from a distance collected in a body, and as we advanced, they began to retreat. It was difficult to get at them or talk to them as friends. We were shocked to find that we were regarded not only as strangers but as suspicious characters or enemies, and it did not take us long to understand that wherever well-dressed men had come into the village, they must have done so as to tax collectors or in similar capacity, and had behaved in such a manner as to create this gulf between the villagers and ourselves. A few years later, I was to have a similar experience in some other villages in Odisha. It would be correct to say that as long as I was at school, I did not mature politically, though in other matters I was inclined to be precautious. This was due partly to my innate proclivity, which pointed in a different direction, partly to the fact that Odisha was a political backwater, and partly to lack of inspiration within the family circle. Occasionally, I did hear about the affairs of the Congress from the elder brothers, but that did not make any impression on me. The first bomb thrown in 1908 created a stir everywhere, and we too were momentarily interested. At the PE school where then I was, our headmistress condemned the throwing of a bomb. The matter was soon forgotten, however. About the same time, processions used to be brought out in the town to condemn the partition of Bengal and to propagate the cause of Swadeshi. They occasioned a mild interest, but politics was tabooed in our house, so we could not take part in any political activity. Our interest sometimes found expression in peculiar ways, such as cutting out pictures of revolutionaries from the papers and hanging them in our study. Our On one day we had a visitor, a relative of ours, and a police officer who saw these pictures and complained to my father, with the result that before we returned from school the pictures were all removed, much to our chagrin. Up till December 1911 I was politically so underdeveloped that I sat for an essay competition on the king's coronation. Though I generally stood first in English composition, I did not get the prize on this occasion. During the Christmas vacation, I went to Kolkata with the rest of the family when King George visited that city, and I returned in an enthusiastic frame of mind. The first political impetus I received was in 1912 from a student about the same age as myself. He came to Cuttack and Puri on a tour and was introduced to us by headmaster Beni Madhav Das. Before he came, he was connected with a certain group in Calcutta which had at its ideal spiritual uplift and a national service along constructive lines. His visit to Cuttack came off at a time when my mind was beginning to turn towards social and national problems. In our group, there was a friend who was more interested in national service than in yoga. Another friend was always dreaming of a Bengali soldier, Suresh Biswas, who had migrated to South America and had made a name of himself there. And as a stepping stone to such a career, this friend was practicing wrestling while some of us were busy with yoga. At a psychologically opportune moment, the visitor talked to us passionately about our duty to our country and about his group in Calcutta, and I was greatly impressed. It was good to be linked up with organizations in the metropolis, and we heartily welcomed his visit. On his return to Calcutta, he made a report about us, and not long after, we received a communication from the head of the group. Thus began a connection which was last several years. As I approached the end of my school career, my religious impulse began to grow in intensity. Studies were no longer primary importance. The members of our group would meet as frequent as possible and go out on excursions. We could thereby keep away from home and enjoy one another's company longer. As a rule, the teachers failed to inspire us, with the exception of one or two who were followers of Ram Krishna and Vivekananda. My parents' guru visited Cuttack about this time, and while he was there, was able to rouse my religious interest still further. But his inspiration did not go very far because he was not a sannyasi. Among the teachers, there was only one who was politically minded, and when we were about to leave school, he congratulated me on deciding to go to Calcutta, where I would meet people who could inspire me politically. I believe that impressions received in early life linger along, and for good or for ill, have a potent influence on the mind of a growing child. I remember that in infancy I often used to hear stories of a ghost, either from the servants or from the elder members of the family. One particular tree was pointed out as being a favorite abode of ghosts. These stories, when narrated at night, had a most chilling effect. On a moon night, after hearing such a story, it was easy to conjure up a ghost on a tree out of the play of light and shade. One of our servants, a mountain cook, must have done as much, for one night he declared that he was possessed by some spirit. A sorcerer who had to be called, and the spirit is exercised. Such experiences were reinforced from other quarters. For instance, we had a Mohammedan coachman who would tell us how skilled he was in the art of exorcising spirits and how often his service were requestioned for that purpose. According to him, he had to slit his forearm near the wrist and offer the spirit some blood as a parting drink. One could question his veracity, and but the fact remains that we did see sometimes fresh incisions on his wrist as well as marks of old ones. He was also a bit of a hakim and would prepare quack remedies for various ailments like indigestion, diarrhea, etc. I must say that such experience is infancy did not have a particular wholesome effect on my mind and did required an effort to overthrow such influences when I grew into boyhood. In this task of freeing my mind of superstition, Vivekananda was of great help to me. The religion that he preached, including his conception of yoga, was based on a rational philosophy on the Vedanta, and his conception of Vedanta was not antagonistic to but was based on scientific principles. One of his missions in life was to bring about a reconciliation between science and religion, and this he held was possible through the Vedanta. Those who tackle the problem of child education in India will have to consider the uncongenial influences which would mold the child's mind at the present day. Of eld interest in is the question of lullaby songs which are sung by the mother, aunt, or the nurse to rock the child to sleep, or some means to adopt to induce unwilling child to take its food. Too often the child is frightened into doing both. In Bengal, one of the most popular lullaby songs describes is Burgess raiding the countryside after the nightfall. Certainly not a congenial song for a sleepy child. One will also have to consider the dreams which sometimes disturb the child's sleep and leave an effect on its waking life as well. A knowledge of psychology and a mechanism of dreams will enable to guardian or tutor to understand the child's mind and thereby help to overcome unwholesome influences preying on its mind. I say this because I myself was troubled greatly by frightful dreams about snakes, tigers, monkeys, and the like in my early years. Only when I began experimenting with yoga in an empirical fashion later on did I hit upon a mental exercise which relieved me of such unpleasant dreams once for all. It is possible in a country like India, and especially in families where conservative, parochial, sectarian, or caste influences resign supreme, to grow into maturity and even to obtain high university degrees without being really emancipated. It often happens, therefore, that at some stage or other one has to revolt against the social or family conventions. I was lucky, however, that the environment in which I grew up was on the whole conducive to the broadening of my mind. In my infancy, I was brought into touch with the English people, English education, and English culture. After that, I went back to our culture, both classical and modern, and even while I was at school, I had interprovincial contacts and friendship which I would have been deprived of if I had been living in Bengal. Lastly, my mental attitude towards Muslims in general was largely through unconsciously influenced by my early contacts. The quarter in which we lived was predominantly Muslim, and one our neighbors were mostly Muslims. They all looked up to father as ordinary villagers to do a patriarch. We took part in their festivals like Muharram, for instance, and enjoyed their akhara. Among our servants were Muslims who were as devoted to us as the others. At school, I had a Muslim teachers and Muslim classmates with whom my relations, as also relations of other students, were perfectly cordial. In fact, I cannot remember ever to have looked upon Muslims as different from ourselves in any way, except that they go to pray in a mosque, and friction or conflict between Hindus and Muslims was unknown in my early days. Though the atmosphere in which I grew up was on the whole liberalizing, there were occasions where I was forced into clash with social or family conventions. I remember one incident when I was about 14 or 15. A class friend of mine who was also a neighbor of ours invited some of us to dinner. My mother came to know of it and gave instruction that no one was to go. It might have been because his social status was lower than ours, or because he belonged to a lower caste, or simply because on medical grounds it was considered inadvisable to dine out. And it is true that very rarely did we go anywhere for dinner. However, I regarded my mother's orders as unjustified and felt peculiar pleasure in defying them. When I took to religion and yoga seriously and wanted freedom to go where I liked and meet whomsoever I wished, I frequently came up against the parental instructions, but I had no hesitation in disobeying them, because by that time I believed, under the inspiration of Vivekananda, that revolt is necessary for self-fulfillment, that when a child is born, its very cry is a revolt against the bondage in which it finds itself. Looking back on my school days, I have no doubt that I must have appeared to others as a wayward, eccentric, and obstinate. I was expected to well at the matriculation examination and raise a prestige of the school, and great must have been the disappointment of my teachers, and when they found me neglecting my studies and running after ash-laden sadhus. What my parents must have thought and felt over a promising boy going off his head can best be imagined. But nothing mattered to me except my inner dreams, and more resistance I met, the more obstinate I became. My parents then thought that a change of environment would perhaps do me a good, and that in the realistic atmosphere of Calcutta I would shed my eccentric cities and take a normal life like rest of the tribe. I sat for matriculation examination in March 1913, and came out second in the whole university. My parents were delighted, and I was packed off to Calcutta.